И теперь мы переходим к нашему следующему выступающему. Мне доставляет большое удовольствие представить вам здесь молодого блестящего философа из Японии Хироки Адзуму. Я хочу сказать буквально несколько слов о нем. Мы мечтаем с ним познакомиться ближе, я имею в виду с его трудами, в первую очередь с ним как с человеком. Мы очень признательны ему и его переводчице Йоко Уэда за то, что они смогли приехать к нам сюда, несмотря на сложный график. Have a very difficult schedule, tough schedule. И буквально несколько слов. Мне кажется очень знаменательным то, что первое эссе Хироки Адзумы было посвящено Солженицыну. С этого начался его писательский опыт. The Solzhenitsyn Essay. Это 93-й год. Хироки Адзума – философ современности, философ современной поп-культуры. И я бы назвала несколько книг, у него их уже, наверное, больше 7, как я понимаю. Но я бы назвала несколько книг, переведенных на английский язык и так или иначе доступных нам с вами, даже если мы не являемся японистами. Вот одна из них – это Ontological Postal. Ну, как можно перевести? Онтологическая почтовая. Книга 98 года, которая завоевала Suntory Literary Prize 2000 года, литературный приз Сантори, и посвящена так или иначе исследованию творчества Жака Деррида. Другая книжка Отаку, Japan's Database Animals, так она переведена на английский, Отаку, цифровые животные Японии или животные из базы данных, из японской базы данных. Книга 2001 года, переведенная на английский в 2009. И уже совсем свежий перевод, книжка под названием General Will 2.0 Руссо, Фройд, Google. Общая воля 2.0. Руссо, Фрейд, Google. Книжка, вышедшая на английском в 2014 году. Но, как вы видите уже по этим названиям, Хироки Адзума соединяет достижения европейской спекулятивной мысли или современной философии, и то, и другое, с материалом, который является нашим актуальным современным материалом, то есть фактически материей нашей сегодняшней жизни в культуре. И мне доставляет большое удовольствие передать ему слово. Я с воодушевлением жду его выступления. Спасибо.
Thank you. I'm Azuma. So it's my pleasure to be invited to such a big symposium, and so to have my first opportunity to give a talk in Russian audience. So, but I have no translation of my work in Russian language, so it's pity. So let me introduce myself very briefly. So my first book was about Jacques Derrida, so as she introduced now. So, and it's a very theoretical one. And so that book was about the concept of ghost and postal communication, a kind of misdelivery in Jacques Derrida's text. So such kind of concept is very closely related to the theme of this panel. And so my second book is about Japanese pop culture, so database animals, about anime or games. So this kind of reinterpretation, postmodern reinterpretation of Japanese pop culture was very new, and so I got a little famous in Japan, and so I was a little away from academia. So now I'm not a scholar, but a critic, and I'm managing my own private company to publish magazines and to hold small talk shows in Tokyo. So maybe today my talk is not so academic. Maybe a kind of secular or rough interpretation of Derrida's concept of ghost in the context of social context in Japan, not only in Japan, but so maybe it's a global context of contemporary society. Anyway, so let's begin. So I don't have so many times. Yes, today, so I want to talk about ghosts. Our world is filled with ghosts. We should learn how to live well with ghosts. That is my point today. So what is a ghost? I want to distinguish between two kinds of ghosts. One is a political ghost, and the other is a technological ghost. A political ghost is a ghost of the dead who was not appropriately mourned or memorialized. To memorialize victims in the past and to give some positive meaning to their death is a basic act in every nation. But some nations have failed in this act. So actually, my country, Japan, is a typical example. Japan has a serious problem. Some of you may know. So Japan has a serious problem in memorializing the dead soldiers and victims of World War II. We have a religious place called Yasukuni in Tokyo, where these dead soldiers are considered to be celebrated. But in reality, Yasukuni is not a national institution, and visits there by politicians always provoke strong political debates, not only in Japan, but among nations in East Asia. So Yasukuni is always a serious diplomatic issue between Japan and China or Korea. So it's very serious. But why such debates? The reason is very simple. Japan still cannot come to a national consensus on the evaluation of World War II. So some believe in Japan that Japan in the war was an absolutely evil since it invaded Asian countries. But others in Japan believe that Japan was not so bad because Japanese imperial expansion at the time should be understood as a kind of reaction forced by other European colonial powers. So these two beliefs or historical narratives still compete in Japan. So the former argues that the political act of visiting Yasukuni to celebrate the dead soldiers is not acceptable because it can mean the affirmation, a kind of affirmation of Japanese invasion. But the latter argues that memorializing the dead soldiers is an indispensable political act because it is their death that made our nation today. So, so this is a very complicated situation. But so we can understand this problem as a question of identity or a question of the borders of a community. So contemporary Japan has two origins. One is the Meiji Restoration, a kind of political revolution in the 19th century. It made Japan a modern European-style nation governed by a constitutional monarchy. The other is its 1945 defeat in World War II. It made Japan a democratic nation with a peace-oriented new constitution that declares the abandonment of any military powers. But some Japanese still believe that Meiji Imperial Japan is an important part of our identity. But our identity. Therefore, they consider that the dead of World War II should be treated and mourned inside our community. But the rest believes that Meiji Imperial Japan is a radically different nation from post-war present Japan, so especially in its military policies. So therefore, they do not agree with the claim that the victims in the war are inside our community. They consider the dead to be outside our community, which means that they do not need to be mourned by the government. So this is very serious opposition about our identity. So Japan's national identity is so splitting, maybe by the trauma of the war. Therefore, it is impossible for Japan to properly mourn these war victims. Japanese people cannot decide whether the victims are inside or outside. The dead, who we cannot decide, inside or outside. So that will be ghosts. So this is just a case from Japan, of course. But I believe the failure of mourning is not limited to Japan. Today I am talking here in Russia. So actually, I recently read Alexander Etkin's article about mourning. So in English, and I found that the Russian nation also has similar problems about mournings or about the failure of mourning. So anyway, so we can develop a kind of comparative study on various forms of the failure of mourning in Russia, Japan, and other nations, maybe. So anyway, the failure of mourning gives us some insight on political philosophy. So Carl Schmitt, a notorious law philosopher in Nazi Germany, once stated that the political thing is nothing other than the distinction between friends and enemies, the inside and the outside of the community. So humans are political animals, so. The politics is the distinction between friends and enemies, according to Carl Schmitt. The act of making borders between the inside and outside of the community, it is a kind of the mark of human being. So humans are the animals who make the borders. So therefore, by definition, humans who cannot make borders, who cannot distinguish the inside from the outside, do not deserve to be called human. So this is the basic principle of Schmittian philosophy, I think. And maybe I dare to say, maybe so it is the same with Hegelian philosophy in general. So this definition of humans is very important, I think. So however, so the failure of mourning, as we can observe in some nations, implies that the Schmittian idea of politics or Schmittian definition of humans does not work in reality now. So in many cases, we cannot distinguish friends from enemies, the inside from the outside. So, and what is more important here is that the failure of mourning, the failure of making a border is closely related to the question of time. So who is a friend? Who is an enemy? These questions may seem clear, at least as long as it is raised in the present tense, now and here. Who is enemy? Who is friend? Is friend. So this is a very simple question. But political questions are always raised in the present tense, and they are always simple. Actually, when you look back on the past, the answer is not always clear. It is actually very difficult to decide who was the friend and who was the enemy, who was inside and who was outside of our community. This is very difficult. So it is because the historical context inevitably gets more and more complicated as time goes on. That is the case with Japan, as I mentioned before. So the origin of the nation is not a singular thing. Giving consideration to the past, to history, making the boundary between friends and enemies, between the inside and the outside, cannot be simple. Therefore, we will always be bothered by ambiguous existences who we cannot decide are friends or enemies. So I want to call them ghosts. The Schmittian philosophy of politics is constructed on the exclusion of ghosts, I think. So I have talked about political ghosts so far. Next, I'm going to talk on the second kind of ghost, technological ghosts. So technological ghosts here means a kind of personal data or informational doubles. So we live in the era of computers and networks, So this means that our lives, our everyday lives, are surrounded by a myriad of informational doubles, alter egos, informational doubles. The rise of informational doubles has great influence of our present social and political reality. For example, we often trust other people's statements online, for example, posts on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, more than our own physical reality, our actual communication. So this confusion or perversion of reality, sense of reality, now causes a serious disorder in global politics. You know, so this is called a post-truth or fake news phenomenon. So I think the source, the reason of such kind of the rise of post-truth or fake news is a kind of temporal perversion. Anyway, so our reality is being eroded by ghosts. So political ghosts are related to the question of time, as I mentioned before. But technological ghosts also related to the question of time. So time is, this is also the question of politics or question of power. So, you know, so Foucault made a theory of the modern nation's political power referring to a panopticon, an architecture of surveillance, panopticon, so you know. So the watcher watches citizens. The citizens interiorize the watcher's gaze. This interiorization of the gaze is the origin of political power, according to Foucault. But however, this model of a panopticon does not work today. So in the panopticon, a single watcher watches everyone. But now, we are living in a society where everyone can watch everyone. Surveillance today is not limited to the CCTV cameras as installed by governments or big companies, etc. We all have smartphones. We all can shoot everyone, everywhere, at every moment, and upload his or her photos instantly, making them public to all the people. So this is our reality. So this is our surveillance. Our lives are always surrounded by the possibility of constant and ubiquitous surveillance. So what is important here is that this new surveillance is no longer trapped in the present tense. This is very important. The surveillance of past days was always in the present tense. That is, I mean, so limited to here and now. So the watcher monitored the watched in the same present tense. So in the condition, so the watcher and the watched both shared the same time. So, but now the formation of surveillance is different. Surveillance today is released from the present tense. We can monitor someone afterwards through recorded photos, videos, GPS data, or purchase records, that is information doubles. So the watcher and the watched do not share the same time anymore. There may be no one who is monitoring us now, so here. So there's no one, there may be no one who is watching us. But however, if something happens here, our information doubles being taken here and now can be called up in order to analyze us and judge us afterwards. So this is today's surveillance. So this is a new formation. And its essence exists in this temporal posteriority. We cannot find any watcher's gaze in the present tense, but we can only see informational doubles, which may or may not be the subject of surveillance. Today, our reality is always being constructed afterwards, not by us living here right now, but based on our informational doubles. We live our lives here and now, of course, but we cannot determine its meaning here and now. So we only determine it afterwards in respect from the future. Of course, this retrospectiveness itself is not new. So, however, it is a new condition that we all have to live in constant awareness of it. Today, we have to live our everyday lives always wondering how our speech or how our behavior will be judged in the future under the future's surveillance gaze. In other words, under the future's ghost gaze. So we are surrounded by informational doubles. Our life will be judged not on our present reality, but on our ghostly doubles. So one more thing. In addition, we can say this would be a technological condition of historical revisionism. Today, we have so many records of the past and of the present. A countless number of documents, photos, and videos are archived and open to the public. So, however, ironically, such an abundance of data, such an abundance of evidence, on the contrary, makes our history uncertain, makes our history multiple. So, because data themselves do not determine any narratives. So, they only allow us to make numerous alternative histories, alternative narratives, by interpreting and reinterpreting the same accumulation of data, of the same accumulation of evidence. So the technology is very important in this point. So politics has been traditionally defined as an act of presence, face-to-face communication, actual communication. But technology, by definition, confuses its order, temporal order. You know, so the subject of today's session so includes 4 words: trauma, memory, oblivion, and knowledge. But so I should propose so we can add one more word there: technology. Technology is very important to discuss about the relationship between time and sense. So now, anyway, so today I have talked about 2 ghosts: political ghosts and technological ghosts. We are surrounded by both ghosts, and the 2 ghosts are closely connected. So, as Jacques Derrida or Bernard Stiegler pointed out, the essence of technology lies in the turbulence of temporal order. So technology creates ghosts. Technology releases the reality from the present. Therefore, it makes the history multiple. It makes our identity multiple. So political ghosts arise from this confusion. We can no longer establish a single origin or single interpretation of our history because our world is filled with information, filled with possible interpretations of evidences. So this is, I think this is our time's condition. So our time's human condition. So maybe so you can ask me, so should we exclude ghosts? If so, in order to exclude the possibility of perversion, to exclude the possibility of historical revisionism. So that is a very difficult question. Very, very difficult question and a serious question. So, but I dare to say today, so my answer is no. So the title of this whole project is The Human Condition. So this title is borrowed from, so Hannah Arendt's famous book. Arendt is believed to be the opposite side of Schmitt, of course, in their political ideology. It is true, Arendt was an exiled female Jew, while Schmitt was a strong male supporter of the Nazis. So completely opposite. However, in my opinion, they have something very important in common in their definition of humans. So because they both tried to draw a kind of boundary between people who can do politics and people who cannot do politics. So both of them, both of Arendt and Schmitt, considered that vague existences, like ghosts, had to be excluded in order to establish the political community, polis. So I cannot develop this argument on about this comparison. This comparison is very maybe provokes some kind of debate. So I wrote this about this subject in detail in my recent book. But of course, it is also not yet translated in Russian language or English language, so you cannot access to it. But so I hope someone to try to translate my recent book. The title is "A Philosophy of the Tourist." Maybe so it can be attractive, I think. But anyway, however, as Derrida pointed out in his Spectres of Marx, or politics of fraternity, so I believe, so we cannot and we should not exclude ghosts. So why? So maybe the reason is the exclusion of ghosts makes humans very cruel. I think ghosts break community. Ghosts multiply history. So maybe most of us hope to eliminate ghosts. But when trying to eliminate ghosts, such kind of vague existence, ambiguous existences, humans become very cruel. The exclusion of ghosts creates a kind of a boundary between humans and people who do not deserve to be humans. Actually, so we are now in reality. So so we are now living in an era where people all over the world are rushing to establish new borders and eliminate those who they cannot admit, and eliminate those who they cannot admit as their friends, in order to reconstruct their political community and political identity, and in order to define themselves as political humans again. So under this condition, I believe our mission as philosophers today is not to establish new political values. So because establishment political values is inevitably connected with the establishment of borders. So rather, I think, so maybe our mission as philosophers today is to think about the possibility of living well with ghosts, or living well without any borders, and to think about the possibility of politics without any borders, politics without any borders, politics without any boundary of the community. So I don't actually. Frankly speaking, I don't know yet. So what is it like? So, but maybe I dream of that possibility. So anyway, so my conclusion is that so even understanding the risk of the rise of historical revisionism or fake news, we should still affirm the technological ghosts, and even admitting the necessity of politics and the re-establishment of national community, we should still accept political ghosts, ambiguous existences. So this is my conclusion. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Хироки, за то, что вы привнесли такую свежую и живую струю, связанную с измерением политического и технологического. Я думаю, мы действительно должны будем вернуться к этим вопросам дальше.